In this episode, I brought back Vlado Solc, Jungian analyst and psychotherapist practicing in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, my hometown. Vlado is a co author of the book Dark Religion Fundamentalism from the Perspective of Jungian Psychology. After listening to this episode, you might want to go back and listen to our last chat about his book in episode 26, season 1. It's titled Self Reflection in a Time of Conspiracy Theories. I know you'll be interested. I'll put the link in the description box. It's my most listened to episode. In his psychotherapy practice, Vlado focuses on psychospiritual crisis or loss of life's meaning and direction. I've been there. Mind body connection, immigration and cultural issues, and women's empowerment. His specialties also include treatment of addictions, individual and marital psychotherapy, and youth populations. If you scan through my list of 50 episodes, you might notice my passion for inspiring you to become curious about your life and to find deeper meaning in ordinary life events. And I do this through conversations, stories, and education. And this reminds me of the root of what it means to know. It's to relate. And you cannot relate to a concept without feeling it in the body too. You might not know that. You'll learn about concepts, but it's back and forth, lively conversations that allow your unconscious to absorb what's beneath the surface of our words and the awkward stories that illustrate how to find meaning in the mysterious messages sent by your unconscious that really get you to the place where you too can gain new insights about yourself and your place in the world. All along, you've been learning about Jung's theory of individuation, which is the framework for exploring your unconscious. I didn't start using that exact term until my last interview with Dr. Jolie Hamilton. That episode is number 48, and it's titled Staying Committed to Self When You're in Relationship. It was a fun conversation about how to stay true to your own development when you're in a relationship with another developing individual, and how actually a relationship individuates too. So today we're going to go deeper into Jung's theory of individuation in a way that you'll be able to relate to and will enhance your practice of self-reflection. The foundation of my chat with Vlado is an article he wrote titled 3 Ways of Why. And I'll share that link too, so you'll be able to reference it. So let's get started. Hey, Vlado, welcome back. What have you been up to?
Hi, Deb. It's so nice to be here with you in this virtual space again. Nice to see you again. So, well, what I've been up to, I guess it's I guess maybe on a creative level. I've been kind of playing with the idea of writing an article in the form of poem. I'm thinking about the article on 2 worlds. One world that is profane, mundane, flat, meaningless, material, if you will, and one spiritual, awesome, magical. And I would like to write about the relationships between these 2 worlds, because I see my clients often go to one world and then to another and then expect the other world to be another, and we all do that. And I'm kind of inspired by maybe Mircea Eliade and others who thought of the world, the nature of religion from this dualistic standpoint. So, and other than that, I'm in the spirit of holidays and Christmas and all of that, and that is a very for me at least self-reflective and transformative time of the year. So I kind of can't wait to be in January.
Yeah, it's I just wrote about that transition space, and it's like, does a day really make a difference? But psychologically, it just really does. So, and I love that email you sent me a couple of weeks ago where you're like, "Oh, by the way, I'm writing poetry too." I was like, "What?" Because my relationship with poetry has been a really awkward one. But that email I got from you that morning made me, it was like a Hermes trick. It made me realize that this dream that I had, I couldn't really even explore until it came out in a poem. And my favorite format is tanka, which for my listeners is just an extension or expansion really of haiku. You just get a couple more lines and a couple more syllables, but it's enough for me to express something that I can't express just directly from my mind, but it's not too wide open because I get too nervous. So like I said, my relationship with poetry is really interesting. I love that. And I think that right now it's relevant because we do live in this really striking time. And there are aspects of the striking reality that are really fantasy-ish. But
Mm.
so in one way, there's almost like this desire for the mundane, but yet, or a different fantasy life that's just a nicer fantasy life. So for that, poetry also for me is you surrendering to creative intelligence, really to your unconscious, as opposed to always like, going from the mind, the thinking to paper. So, so you'll have to come and tell us about your experience.
Well, maybe I'm a little bit shy about my poetry. I don't feel I'm a poet. I do it mostly for my own self-therapy purposes.
Yeah, well,
And with
aren't all
real.
poets like really self-conscious?
Uh,
I've been dying to get one to come and chat with me. So,
I'm sure they are. Franz Kafka, he didn't publish anything before his death. He asked his friend to please go and burn all of my work because it's worth nothing. And his friend
wow.
said, "Okay, let me take care of it." And so
Well,
his books were
it
published afterwards. So I'm sure he was quite self-conscious about it too.
it makes sense because that's the realm of the feminine, and the feminine is where we're vulnerable and awkward
Mm,
and self-conscious. So,
mm.
okay,
Yeah.
great. Well, let's dig in. And for my podcast listeners, I'm a little awkward today because I'm going to try to have this be a video as well. So, to my YouTube followers, you're going to see how I read my how I read my questions. So, anyway, so we'll see how this is going to go, but it's going to be a great conversation. So, I really enjoyed your article, Three Ways of Why. And the title challenged me actually. I was like, three ways of what does there's just something odd about that title. And I guess it was challenging my ego, which I love when I realized it. So asking why is a great place to start when you're self-reflecting about something. But this also came up in my conversation with Dr. Jolie Hamilton recently when we were discussing, or she talks about how people get stuck at why. And even if they want to get out a why, they might not know how. And it could also be that they kind of don't want to get out of why. So they may say they do, but they don't really do because, of course, there's always this unconscious agenda at work. So, and that then we talked about how creativity comes in and how our ego needs a little help from our imagination, from our unconscious. So for me, your article, Three Ways of Why, felt like a journey instead of an answer. And Three Ways of Why feels like a new beginning, a continuation, a starting point for like this next phase of unfolding. That's just how I experienced it. So I think a great place to start for my listeners and viewers would be what inspired you to write the article and where the title came from.
Um, well, I do agree with you that why can be kind of limiting, that it doesn't have in its what and how, perhaps. Maybe if I could rewrite this article again, if I would rewrite it, I would say three ways of why, when, how, and where. But I kind of look at it symbolically, like when there's sort of a three elements of reality. I refer it to very simply as a past, present, and future. And the reason why I wrote this article was I often notice when I spoke to my clients and I would say, why? The clients would answer something that I didn't expect them to answer, or like I was not referring to that precise why, right? Like, why are you feeling this way, right? Like it can be a
Mhm.
very simple thing, or like, why Well, because something happened in the past. Oh, okay. So you're
Mm.
referring to something, some event that happened. So you are looking at it sort of in a causal way. Or there could be a why, because I have an intention. I am going to buy something because I need it, because I also dreamed about it, I wanted it, and so on. So I guess it came to me as a form of clarification as a Jungian analyst to ask those questions precisely and be mindful. I again perhaps wrote it for myself, to be mindful when I'm asking those questions. What am I actually asking about, and how my patient may potentially answer it, and how I can then focus myself into going to these deeper levels of unconscious that I wrote about in my article.
I love it because we live in this sort of cause effect world. And even being present and mindful, we have to be intentional about it. It's not a natural part of how we live. And
Mm,
so I love that you made this observation about every time I ask why, it's always going back to something. But we have lots of stuff in our past. So why are only certain things a problem, right now? So
mm,
I really love it. So the way you started the article with this C.G. Jung quote, I really loved it. And for me, it maybe you meant to use it as a way that summed up the whole thing, but it really did for me. And I want to start by reading it for my listeners. It's one of those sentiments that you won't really understand fully with the mind, that you really have to involve your body in it, for me anyway. And this quote feels like poetry. And you know how Jung had all these different ways of writing? Sometimes he wrote like a scientist, but sometimes he wrote like a poet.
mm.
And then, of course, the Red Book and his images. So here's the quote. I no longer seek the cause of a neurosis in the past, but in the present. I ask, what is the necessary task which the patient will not accomplish? And you could just replace neurosis with what's problem, and you can just replace patient with me, and therapist with another part of me, right? Because you can play this role. So it's really like,
Very
to
true.
yeah, to ask yourself, like, my problem right now, what's going on in the present that actually makes it a problem? So anyway, I love sharing that quote. And I loved how you describe a depth approach to therapy as creative teamwork. I hadn't heard that before, between the client, the analyst, and the unconscious, of course, of both, and how successful therapy only happens if the therapist is transformed along with the client, which this, of course, is very depth psychology, and that the transformation is facilitated by this third presence, the unconscious, which has its own intelligence, which makes you really brave as a therapist, knowing that, okay, I'm only going to be successful for my client if I have a transformation too. Yikes. What's that going to be about? Because you don't even really know what they're going to bring out of you. So I know this is going to blow away most people's understanding of what's really going on in the therapy room. But maybe it might be comforting for the patient to know that the therapist is like being worked on too.
Mm.
So maybe just start there and go sort of wherever you want to go about just this sort of approach to therapy as this creative teamwork between these three presences in the room.
Mhm. That is, indeed a very revolutionary idea in the field of therapy. Of course, Jung he began with the Freud. He was his student amongst others, and at that time the therapy was rather authoritarian, kind of I am therapist. The client lies down on a couch. I mean, that was the Freud technique. Close your eyes and associate to different things, and therapist would be detached from that, right? He would be only providing some kind of feedback to the client, but he would not be really involved. Of course, the Freud talks about the transference, countertransference. So he brought up that idea that the client evokes something in a client, and there may be some original conflict between the parents, etc. But Jung took it to another different level. because he studied alchemy, he realized, and other ancient and mystic texts, he realized that we are all part of a field, if you will, that we are all interconnected, that there is a sympathy of all things and beings, and that we are in this field. And that field, when we both enter that field, we are like in a kind of a vase, the alchemical dish that we are being cooked with the client. And that is really where we are touching in a session something that can transform us both. And it may rather sound strange to many listeners and to many people who imagine therapy in a kind of a rather maybe traditional way that people used to think about it, that the therapist is some kind of an authority that has an answer for the client. But I would say therapy is more like a relationship that is created over time, and out of that relationship, things emerge. Therapists can make so-called mistake that can be very transformative for the client, and vice versa. And I noticed as a therapist, and I'm sure you notice that too, as working with your clients, that we get clients that we need, or we are at a certain time in our lives that we have certain questions and we are stuck on certain problem, or we are going through certain situations that we are still in process, that is unfinished. And then the client comes in and it feels like, wow, it looks like I'm going to learn something here, and hopefully we'll learn it together in the right way, that we minimize the risks and the problems for each other. And that's when there is energy in the session. So I guess, I don't even know if you had a question.
No,
this kind of the alliance. So I think that's what's different about trained analysts versus the patient who's coming from sort of a layman world. He does not, or she does not understand that the therapist has been trained to that. So when I am sitting at a session with a client, I'm trying to pay attention to my own feelings, to my own sensations, emotions in my body, intuitions, reveries, there are images that emerge because they may be very important. Just the things that pop up in a sort of a background of my mind, or the images may be very helpful. And then I decide how I'm going to share them, what's the value of them, and how I can bring them to the session. And hopefully when I work with the patient, that they also will learn to share those and bring them up, because that is the unconscious, that's how unconscious speak to us, not only through experiences in our life, but also via dreams, daydreaming, or certain enactments, or certain happenings that happen in our life that we will look at more symbolically, or more analytically, that we try to understand that is there a deeper meaning of some situations in our life.
Yeah, and it's that third presence, the unconscious, is like this other source of wisdom, because we're not going to get out of it by staying in our mind, but we're going to want to try to get out of it staying in our mind. So even like a memory, like when you ask why, that memory that comes up is a little breadcrumb, a little clue from the unconscious that says, go here and see where that goes. And yes, I have noticed, and I've laughed along with my clients because they see it too, because I'm not a traditional licensed psychotherapist, and I don't have to follow, those rules. So the relationship between me and my clients is just, it's out there. It's on the table. So it's like, oh, this is so interesting why you found me, how you found me, and then what's going on. And it can be when you are aware of it, it's exciting, and you feel the creativity because you feel the third presence, versus maybe a traditional person who comes to see therapy and they are looking to the therapist as an authority figure, as opposed to, so it's also just, I don't know, juicier. I call it juicier. It's more interesting. And
I think that's the difference between analysis and this, I call it the traditional therapy, maybe, that the therapist doesn't have an answer. we are waiting for the answer to emerge.
Mhm.
We may ask right questions, we may have certain wonder or awe about it, but we don't know the answer. It's not like I have something like a medication to give you, so when you ingest it, then you will be better, right? We are trying to explore and find out what the answer may be. So we are both sitting in unknown and hoping that from this unknown, something known or something transformative will emerge. And that often happens if you sit with the unknown for a long time and with the open mind and open heart.
Yeah. And then what's happened with a lot of my clients is there has been a direct route to being really open, and unexpected things have happened and things have come up that they thought, oh, I thought I dealt with that, but they were open and they just, so there was like a new purpose for revisiting those things. And in these particular clients, they're writing books. So, and their relationship with their writing changed as a result of this sort of relationship, this open relationship. So I love it. So now let's, oh, go ahead.
Well, I just wanted to add to it. So in basically when Jung was talking about the past, and he was trained originally by Freud, right? So there was certain causa efficiens. So it's the primal cause, this original mover. And Freud thought, well, there was some trauma, most often sexual trauma, that caused something in the patient that he or she had to repress it and was sort of forgotten. And now that person became neurotic, and Freud came, well, let's talk about past, what happened. Let me help you through these associations, through these free associations, maybe we can get there. And then Freud used a kind of symbolic method to figure out what was repressed by the patient. And the patient thought, oh, that's what it was, experienced certain catharsis, so certain emotional relief. But I have a lot of patients who come to me and say, I had a trauma. I'm very conscious of it. I know, or I'm very knowledgeable of it. I know what happened. I had this trauma. It was very hurtful, but I'm still suffering. I'm still having nightmares. I'm still stuck. I'm still not free from it. So just going back and looking for this original cause, it would be useless. So what is there? What else is there that we need to figure out? We need to connect. What part is unconscious to the client that we need to find out?
So is that then, that's what the first way of why is becoming conscious of the origin, or the origin of what is causing the suffering?
Yes.
Or okay.
Yeah, the first why would be the, if you will, a Freudian why.
Okay. Okay, great. And
Well,
so yes, the catharsis, that could feel liberating to know, oh, now I know why, I feel this way. Or maybe even now I know why I have this pattern of seeing things. But then again, if it's still like, if you're still suffering, you might have this initial liberation, but then, what's the meaning of the suffering right now? So the second way of why gets to what Jung was saying in the quote you started the article with. The first why doesn't explain why the initial wound or event is a problem now in the present, unless you weren't conscious of it. So if you weren't conscious of it, then it's like, whoa, that first why is like liberating all by itself. And you may be fine for the next 10 years, maybe.
well, not necessarily. Maybe some people do. Maybe some people can do their work on their own. But there is more to integrate than just a memory in terms of, oh, now I know about it, and maybe I can live with it, or I can individuate it. And well, sometimes I have a clients who are really very unconscious about what let's say they come in there, really, they deal with the anger, their arguments with their spouses and so on. And I ask, why do you think that is? Well, I have no idea. Well, tell me about your father. Well, he was really a strict person, he would frequently, physically punitive and so on, critical. And distant and angry. Do you think that has to do something with your anger? I don't know. I don't think so. Right. So there is something that is disconnected. And
Mm-hmm.
even if you help this patient to make this connection, or maybe you internalize certain complex, that your complex became, or your father's behavior become your complex as you live with it, and now you're living out of it or living it out, it still doesn't help to heal the soul, because there is this emotional integration that part of how do we now live with that new emotional energy that we become more conscious of, because it doesn't go automatically away. It keeps living. It's like,
Oh,
well,
right.
oh, I
Okay.
see that I'm opening a lot of things that I see that you have some other
No,
questions.
no,
So,
that was no, that was me. So this is really helping me. Stories help me. So that was me. Like I knew that, well, I actually didn't really know I was suffering until later on, but like I knew I didn't appreciate the way I was parented. Let's just put it that way. Like
mm,
my mom was mean, but I sort of let her off the hook in my mind because I was told that she had suffered as a child. So she suffered, right? And yes, did she do better? Yes. But so I used my mind to just sort of let her off the hook. And I actually never felt the emotions in the present that were attached to the trauma that I had experienced as a child. So is this like the second why realm, or are we moving
yeah,
to
well,
the?
the second, yeah. So what you're saying, what you can heal, what you can feel, right?
Mhm. Oh, yeah.
So, and there is something about changing the emotion in a feeling, changing something really raw that is in our body, that is there, that is gripping us, that is making us to act out certain way, or being compulsive, or being explosive, or
Or being the opposite, like controlling of
yeah,
ourselves.
yeah,
So, and controlling of our emotions, because that was me. I wasn't allowed to act. I didn't act out. It all went inward for me. I need to fix the outward. So,
that is also a sort of a traumatic
mhm,
response, right? Like one
mhm.
could be we identify ourselves with the oppressor or with the abuser, or we just develop way around the abuser so it doesn't hurt us. And that often goes through swallowing the pain and internalizing it and feeling bad about ourselves, having a lot of shame, having a lot of depression, etc. So there are different ways of how we um, relate to traumatic experiences in our life.
So can you talk more about, so this quote from your article, the cause lies in the present moment, not in the past, and it is the only cause that can affect the change. That's sort of the second
Mhm.
way of why, right?
Well, so in my article, actually, the second way of why they don't go chronologically. So I spoke
Okay.
about the future why, like
Okay.
why to what purpose, where I'm going with this. I have certain intention that can be very conscious, or there can be intention that is unconscious. Simply my unconscious is pushing me to do something, or something that is emerging in the form of symbol that I am grasped by, but I don't understand, but I feel compelled to follow it. And there is the symbol that is, when the symbol is unconscious, that pretty much it becomes a compulsion, or becomes a very strong emotion, or becomes something that is overwhelming, something that is dragging me somewhere, and I am um, more or less a victim of it. So Jung said, well, we have to develop a conscious relationship with those opposites, because symbols often have a kind of a bipolar quality, or a dual quality that can be very fascinating and warm and attractive, but can be very scary, dark, and destructive in a way. So we have to develop, or ideally, individuation is about developing this middle ground, that I can understand the archetypes around me and how they affect me, and have a certain relative way of resisting, but also dialoguing with them so they don't swallow me up. So the causa finalis, it's more like an Adlerian way. It's more about where things are going. How am I going to be adapting to this future, to my goals, etc., conscious or unconscious? And the third way, which I would call a Jungian, like a sort of a truly Jungian, that's where the transformation happened, that I name causa praesenti, which is the present cause, right? So we have a causa efficiens, causa finalis, causa praesenti. So the praesenti is really here and now. Mm-hmm. What is happening if you ask someone, well, why didn't you say something, right? If your husband was mentally or even physically abusive, like, why didn't you do that? Or why didn't you call police? Or why didn't you speak up? Or could be, very subtle things that happens in our life. Well, because I was afraid, or because I was so angry, or because I was not aware, or because I completely checked out, I dissociated, I wasn't even present. So there are many whys that pertains to really not the complex that was internalized in the past, but like how that complex is present in the psyche. It's almost like psyche has no time, like that there is no time in collective unconscious. There are very interesting things that are done, for example, in a hypnosis. You can do hypnosis like in a regression in a certain time, and the subject who is hypnotized would be able to look at the wall and read the time from the clock. That what time was it on the clock on the wall? And then when the event was actually, when the therapist then later on tried to really research like about what time it was, so that was really accurate. So it wasn't a memory, it wasn't a real regression, like that person was able to be in that past, meaning he just went to this unconscious timelessness that is this beyond the category of space and time, and will be able to be there actually and have the emotion of crying, etc. So in that moment, if I ask why, I don't really mean, well, because my father was angry and I never developed this ability to stand up to somebody. But it's more like, why? Because I felt this. Well, how did it feel? What is it in your present moment that it's not allowing you to say something, or it is allowing you to do something? And that's where you come to this symbolic work that I try to explore in this article, is really working in that moment with the client. And that also has to do with the therapist, because we are in that field and I can feel it, right? I, as a therapist, can feel, oh my goodness, that was a scary situation that happened. And I have a certain feelings about it. I feel choked up. I feel in my body, perhaps what my client was feeling at that moment. So now we are both in it, like we tapped into something symbolic, into this field that we can start entangling by figuring out how to dialogue with it, how to speak up, how to find different parts of our personality that can have a voice, that can push against it, can have a relationship, it doesn't have to be scared of that energy that is constellated within. Does that make sense?
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. And just one thing that comes up for me is, this is at one of my residentials, when in my own falling apart, I could feel this opposition in me as two really distinct presences. And I'm a Gemini, so I'm a walking tennis match anyway, just all day long. Is this the right thing to do? And like my opposing planets are Saturn and Pluto. So I have to be a rule follower, but yet I have to be a rebel at the same time. So like, this is my life. But I did active imagination, which we have talked about before on my podcast. And two of my cohort buddies were leading me. And so they are the ones who helped me sort of personify what they were, so that I actually could have a dialogue with them. So the one presence because we might be too quick. Like there are these terms that get thrown out, like your inner judge. We don't really know if it's an inner judge. That's what inner critic or whatever it was. And so
Sure.
we might just automatically think that's about judgment. But for me, this presence, as they asked me questions about what it looked like, is it was a lawyer and it wasn't a judge. And the lawyer wanted to make his case. And
Mhm.
so that was really shifting for me because I thought there was this inner sort of, I was borrowing other people's terms, like this is a judge or, but no, it was, no, I just want to, because I was exploring my inner child was being unleashed. So I was
Mhm.
like staying out and doing shots and getting swept up in all kinds of stuff after divorce. And I came to understand that my inner lawyer was just a little worried, like you might go too far.
So
Right.
he
So
worked
he's,
for you,
yeah,
right? He was
yeah,
your attorney. Yes, I get
right,
it.
exactly. So let me make my case and then, okay, you make your own decision. And then the other presence was, didn't even have a form, but it was very childlike. And during that time, I would like break out in cartwheels, literally on the volleyball court. I would just start doing cartwheels at 50 and skipping down the sidewalk. And like I was very childlike because I hadn't allowed myself to be that way. So the feeling, the emotion is often doesn't have we have not put the right name on it, right? So what you're saying is the imagination then can help us really find the meaning in the emotion now,
Mhm.
not having like why was that useful? Well, it was useful because I was learning how to live in the world in an entirely different way. And
Mhm.
so those inner characters help me do that instead of just feeling tortured by the emotion of like, oh, you're not doing the right thing, or oh, I want to do this. So then I have conversations with my lawyer. He shows up from time to time.
Mhm. Yeah, it's what Jung speak about. This is actually very beautiful what you're saying, and thanks for bringing this up, because Jung understand the symbol of being a sort of a combination of idea, but also affect.
Mm.
So besides being an image, right? Besides like a kind of
Mhm.
like a picture, but image, it's not image in terms of like just seeing a picture, because
Mhm.
even say blind people can have an image that consists of their own ability to see. But symbol encapsulates the emotion. There is something moving, right? There is this emotion that is actually moving the life through. That's why we are alive. Otherwise, we would be robots if we didn't have those. So by connecting that, you bringing up something that is there, but more, right? Because there is an archetype, right? So it's the critical voice, maybe. Well, but he's a lawyer, actually. He's not only a sort of a punitive or
Mhm.
critical person, but he's checking in with me. So he may represent my thinking function, and he can be somebody like a trickster, right? Like a Hermes, who is
Mhm.
like allowing me to move forward and bridging to another type of emotion. So you call this archetype being a psychoid, right? Like having the spirit and the matter combined in it, and it has its origin in the body, or is it one? The roots are in the body, but also the crown is in the spirit. That's why symbols are so important.
Mhm.
If you like, when you send me your beautiful poem, right? You said you express something, because that's where the life was, right? That's in your dream. There was something living, something beautiful, something that brought up the emotions, and now you can turn them into feelings, and they can animate you. They can bring this libido, or the life
Mhm.
energy to your life, and that is the core of the Jungian work, if I would say. It's really working with images, not images as pictures, but images as alive entities, as organs of the soul. And Jung's active imagination technique, which you write in your book a lot about, and you develop many different kinds of those, are very helpful. Just being with images, playing with images, and going inside the images and exploring how different images affect us, and how can they move us, and how can they be even destructive or helpful, but having a dialogue with them, it's the work.
Yeah.
It's the
And I
cause of
talk to people,
presenti.
and the way that I talk about images is I just call them impressions, because an emotional reaction is an image. So it's like an impression, or even like if you're really taken with something, like a texture, like the experience, an impression. So, um, how I experience film, and I feel
Mhm.
obsessed about it, an obsession, right? I need
Mhm.
to go see that movie like 8 times because I know there's something in it for me. But speaking about like the different ways of why, I think about what happened not on purpose, but how the exploration of my mother complex occurred. So I knew, I was conscious, although I didn't really feel like I ever experienced trauma. I didn't experience physical abuse, that sort of thing. But I suffered, right? And I went off into the world and developed ways of acting and behaving that were very controlling. A drive for independence, to have my own thing. I didn't want to fit into anybody else's thing, and then fixing, and sort of my whole purpose for living was, so she felt like she was doing better than her mother, which meant I had to be perfect. So when I wasn't perfect, right? So all that. But when I got to the space of, and I did do a past life regression, but I didn't experience it the way that maybe believers of that, like it has, you don't have to believe in past lives to just use it as active imagination. But I found, I think I found the present sort of emotion, and it had to do with feeling suffocated. So I felt
Mhm.
suffocated in her womb because of the
Mhm.
expectation, the burden placed on me for how she would feel about my behavior. And then when I did other active imagination exercises like drawing, and I made, by drawing like a child, I made connections I hadn't made ancestry wise, that helped me then understand how I showed up in my marriage. So then I found like the current meaning of that past in my present. But then it became more about like this unleashing thing. So something that was buried in me got to be born, or got to be unleashed. And I think that then that's the ultimate to me. That changed my life, or my outlook on life. And it led to sort of creativity in me. So I can, and that's just one little mother complex, which isn't little, it's like
But that's very
huge.
profound, but that's very deep.
Right. And that occurred over like 5 years. It took sort of
Sure,
5 years
it
of
takes
exploring
time.
it. Mhm.
That's beautiful. And you see, when you said that the emotional reaction is an image, I would say the image has a potential, right? Like, so image is like a well that it goes really deep and there's a lot of water in it. So that's the by definition is a symbol. It's inexhaustible. Even though the
Mhm.
symbols can become sort of signs, they can
Right.
die out, but there is no more that we can receive from them. But when you start looking deeper, and when you start going, okay, so it's just a feeling of suffocation, right? It's somewhere in your body, but then, oh, I'm in a womb, it's suffocating me. What does it mean? How does it relate? And then you expanding it, and suddenly allowing yourself to understand the meaning, which it's a big word. I am fascinated by the word, like what does it even mean? The meaning, right?
Mhm.
Jung said that the
Mm.
dream that is not understood is a mere occurrence.
Mm.
But if it's understood, it becomes a meaningful life experience. So there is something meaningful that means like it connects you with your world and your place in life, and why you are here, where you're going, and what are you doing, and why is it even feel good to be free from something suffocating. And that is beautiful, and that is all that we stand in front of. And good for you doing that work, because you are a this
Yeah,
kind
and it's also never ending, of course. So always circling
of.
back. But each time it's deeper, so it's like more depth, but then there's more of a height at the same time, like in how you relate to something.
Mm.
So we've talked about well, that already answered my next question. I wonder if like bringing in archetypes into this
Mhm.
process, and I'm just thinking about how when you the really juicy part is when you start to come in better relationship with yourself, with these things in your unconscious, like, okay, what is this pattern or complex or whatever, and what is its meaning now? And you just come to a better relationship with these parts of you that then Jung said that, not in these words, these are my words, that when you come into better relationship or deeper relationship with your personal unconscious, then there's this other realm that opens up, this archetypal realm. So the bigger forces that flow through us that really cause the sort of evolution in our consciousness. So there's
Mhm.
the personal piece, but we exist within a collective unconscious as well. And where I see it the most, of course, I came of age in the 80s, and the 80s was a really unleashing of a lot of things from the unconscious that had to do with the role of women, what we thought about women. So it's interesting to go back now and see all the things that came together that unleashed this awareness collectively about women's experience that until then had been felt only personally. So when I talk to my clients, I say, "Oh, just wait. Like when you're ready and then you get swept up or Hermes comes and like kidnaps you into this other archetypal realm where you don't even really, it's disorienting, but it's also can be pretty exciting. And the purpose of that is that as Jung says, the fate of humanity depends upon the self-reflecting individual. So all the various people and all the patients and all the people sort of self-reflecting that then are kind of open to this other intelligence flowing through them, we are all working that at one point it will all coalesce into something more collective, a new idea or a new whatever, or a new religion in the past,
Mhm.
that didn't just like one day somebody thought of that. It was like this, there's a lot of stuff going on. So I don't know if like you like talking about the archetypes, but want to like bring
Well,
that
yeah,
in.
it's a very it's very fascinating. It's a very deep kind of concept, and I am not really keen of talking about archetypes from this like a big picture. This is the
Mm-hmm.
age of Aquarius. That's what's
Mm-mm.
happening, right? This
No,
sort
like,
of a Christianity is it's transforming, and so which is probably true that it's kind of a big archetypal cycle in a way that was in the name of you know Jesus, and in certain aspect
but it
the
all starts with
Mary.
with the individual experiences. That's what it all starts with.
Yes, yes. So we don't know if we are sort
Mm-mm.
of in what how would I put it? What is inside is outside, was outside is inside, right? So we have our own development. We are living in an era of post enlightenment in a way that we are trying to understand things by rational means, trying to analyze religion, etc. And in a way, throw a lot of light on fundamentalist or rigid aspects of religion that has been there up till now. And we are awakening to the new era, if you will, that Jung foreseen so much, that I would call a spirituality. What do we do with all these symbols that sort of are no longer active for us? Do we find new symbols? And Jung said, yes, we have to create our own personal myth in order to be happy or whole. I should say, I shouldn't use the word happy, to be whole or wholer
Mm-hmm.
in our lives. That is to discover archetypes as they emerge from unconscious, rather than create them and or rigidly adhere to some kind of symbols that are already created for us by the Hollywood or any religion. So we are here sort of standing in front of this big unknown, left on ourselves and being individuals who have to find the collective meaning meaning of life that only goes through individual exploration or unconscious. And I know this may be sounding a little bit heady. I like to sort of anchor it by maybe by examples that people experience in their own therapy, right?
Mm-hmm.
There could be a punitive critical mother that created a complex in a client, and the client is suffering from it by having all kinds of moods, anger or depression, etc. And that critical mother is coming through the dreams through the unconscious, and the client is in a dialogue with those dark energies. But there is more to it, right?
Mm-hmm.
There is, as Jung said, that the archetype, the complex is an archetypal core. So there is something attached to it. There is this witch, or there is this archetypal punitive mother, but there is also a great mother that can come in a form of healing, in a form of compassion, in a form of love, in a form of embracing and taking care of the client. And that is the energy that ultimately is healing. Now, who the client is in touch with, what is it like? Is it something that just came from outside? These are the inner forces, these are the inner symbols that transform and help to transition, or maybe to relativize that negative mother complex into something more whole, which is also as, right? It's
Mm-hmm.
painful, but it is also beautiful.
Mm-hmm. I love that. I have like images that are coming up for me. Well, dream images for sure. So when you talk about the archetypal mother, which no human being can be. So then there's this wrestling with what is the source of the healing is not from the human being. It's from this other source that's archetypal. It's bigger, and how to tap into that. And I remember when I could tell, well, I had a dream. I talk about this, it's in my book and even my dissertation, where at a really critical point when I was beginning to open up and sort of like surrender to an experience and let go of control. And of course, there was a younger man involved. And in my dream, I was in a campground bathroom. And the next day, we were actually going hiking in a state park. So it was interesting, the night before in the campground bathroom. And I was done going to the bathroom because I had had my series of dreams about toilets before, but I was done. And it was steel and cold and dark. And I had to feel my way out. And I didn't get it at the time until later, like, no head feel. And then I get to the door and I fell back down a hill, and it was kind of like in slow motion, and it was warm, and there were leaves rustling, and it was like I felt so safe letting go of control. And later on I saw it as kind of prophetic of that I would be okay, like going through this experience I was going to have, which was crazy. But when I drew that, and then I wanted to draw hands at the bottom. And for me, that was like this, I guess, transforming of my mother thing, right? So I had this mother complex, but yet I felt like those hands were a mother presence.
Which was from the archetypal mother.
Yes.
It was from beyond your mother. Yeah. And this is so beautiful. It's we can say that unconscious is intelligent, right? That is that is wise. It oftentimes it happens. I have a dream like, wow, like I never seen this place in my life, yet it exists somewhere in this dream world. I'm in it. It's not that it is in me, but I'm in it. So there is a wisdom that is given to us through the symbols and through the archetype, and those wisdoms can come by real realizations or feelings, or just feeling good and like realizing something. Wow, and this is my life, and now I feel better. I feel more accepted, or I feel more belonging or alive or whatever that is,
Mhm.
something changes. And that's what perhaps happened to you and many of us.
Well, for me, it was embodied dream. Like it was, I felt it and I felt it when I awoke, this feeling of safety that I had never, ever felt in my life. And you don't know like what feelings you haven't felt until you feel them. And then you're like, whoa, I never felt that before. And that led to other experiences of
Mhm.
feeling things that I really hadn't felt before, because how could I? I wouldn't have been
Mhm.
able to feel them. So the dream for me, I would just keep tapping into that feeling of safety. And I needed it. It didn't come from my ego saying I'll be okay. It came from a deeper
Mhm.
source
You
that
open
was,
yourself up
yeah.
to it, right? You open to receiving that. And that's important that you didn't get close in your ego, but you open yourself to that energy that help you to move you forward.
Yes, and
That
that
is,
was my whole thing, was like every time I allowed myself to be more awkward and vulnerable, I was rewarded in really interesting ways. S-
when I was working, there was like a time when I was working on a dissertation about the religion. I was thinking, reading a lot of ideas of theology about God and so on. I spent a lot of time in my college reading uh, philosophy that was really focused on the holy, the idea of God, and I had this beautiful dream that I just tell you the end of this dream. It was a really long dream. One day I can maybe tell you the whole dream, but at the end of this dream, I'm in a mountain. It's a huge mountain. I'm in a cave, and a fairy, like a light, beautiful woman, saying, follow me, come here, come here." So I'm following her, and she leads me through kind of a catacombs, and I come, and there is this beautiful door. There is like
Mm,
the huge door is like 5 times bigger than me, and there is like a mandala window, kind of like a Gothic window
mhm.
that the light was shining through it.
Oh my God.
And I'm standing in front of it, like, wow, that is beautiful. And suddenly there is a voice that is saying that you cannot know the God. This is as close as you can come to
Mm,
God. And then I feel all kinds of feelings. My body, I feel like reverence. I feel the humility. I feel so
mm.
small but so big in the same time. It was this beautiful experience. And I got it then, right? Something I got. And now, who came up with that? I didn't come up with this. Like in a million years, I wouldn't come up with such a beautiful idea. But the dream maker, someone, the wise unconscious, gave me this beautiful gift of this dream.
Oh, that's a little gift. Yeah. Little glimpse. Little glimpse. I love it. You're like, they're like, this is as close as you get. And you're like, this is good enough. I'll take it.
Exactly.
This is awesome.
I didn't even want to open those doors. Yeah.
So, okay, this is great. I love how you end your article with the hopeful thought that successful therapy happens when we experience the present meaning of past experiences and actions, and the synchronistic experience of finding new meaning allows us to, in a way, travel in time to change the future. So I think that's like a great way to end. And maybe you can end by just commenting about what you mean when you say that.
Well, I really believe we can travel in time. And that time is not that we go back there, but that we change it now and we see and understand the past
Mhm.
in a different light from the present individuated moment. So a client who may think that their mom is a really horrible mother can discover that their mother did the best and had a lot of trauma in her own life, and that was very busy and had 7 children and had done the best and also was able to provide and take care, suddenly is a different mother than what they came to therapy to begin with. So what changed? That the mother in the past have actually changed in their eyes, because it's the psychic reality that is always present. It's the memory, it's only an idea or a projection to the image we had about the past. But what actually is important and is what we have right now, even though that may change in the future.
Yeah. Yeah. That's beautiful. And I would say my sort of task has been to go from living the first part of my life in a very masculine oriented way, meaning, independence driven. I'm in control of myself. I know what I want, to opening up to the feminine, which is more meandering and mysterious and things that really frustrate the masculine. Like right now I'm experiencing that. Um, and and being okay with not knowing and surrendering to a kind of mystery instead of always being driven by, well, this is my goal in 5 years. Not that you shouldn't have goals, but just the sense of I'm more open to the mystery of how this next part of my life is going to unfold. And I wouldn't have been able to suffer. Sometimes I suffer right now because of that. It's anxiety, but now I'm aware, and now I have dialogues with my anxiety, and my anxiety actually sometimes comes out in a poem that says, yes, the unknown is can be scary, but the unknown is where creativity comes from. Darn.
Yeah, that, I love your podcast, and I bet that's why many people love it, because you're so open and you are vulnerable, and you're speaking from your heart, you're speaking from your experience. You're not speaking from the books, but you're speaking from life, and that's so beautiful. So
yeah, I have to. I don't know. I think it's just part of how I process is I have to talk about it. So,
that's awesome.
So this has been great. Of course. What do you want from people? Of course, you want them to buy your book, check out your book. Is there a preferred place you want them to go check it out?
Well, I mean, if they're interested in a book, then yes, that would be good if they bought it.
Or
But
articles and
yeah,
also,
I mean, pretty much, you can post a link on your podcast where people can look up things that I've been writing and maybe
okay.
buy the book if that would be helpful for them.
And also if you guys like this conversation, you've had conversations with other people too. So I could include the link to your conversation with Shane or anybody else that you've done some podcast interviews with, just so people can get more of you.
Sure.
Conversation.
Yeah,
So
thank you. I appreciate that.
yes. So I want to say thank you for a conversation that took my listeners a little deeper into depth psychology and offered another way to think about the individuation journey, this framework, the 3 ways of why. And I hope that you feel inspired by it. So thanks for coming back.
Well, thank you. The pleasure is mine.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Vlado and do feel inspired to just explore your life experience through 3 ways of why. Until next time.